Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. And in this, we are looking at India's relations with Bhutan, India's closest friend in South Asia, but more recently, how China is steadily making inroads with Bhutan also. India has almost a 700-kilometer boundary with Bhutan that it shares, and 4 of India's states have their boundaries touching Bhutan: Sikkim, Assam, Arunachal, and there is also West Bengal. West Bengal's electricity comes largely from the hydropower produced by Bhutan, and there are other economic linkages. More recently, India's foreign minister was welcomed to Bhutan as the first guest after the COVID pandemic. But what is worrying is the more recent 3-step roadmap of expediting the Bhutan-China boundary negotiations that Beijing seems to have pulled off with Bhutan. Is that a cause of worry? What are its implications? To understand that, we have PROBAL DASGUPTA with us, who is the author of a very fine book on India's standoff with the Chinese in Nathula, 1967. And we have the well-known commentator from India's Northeast, Jaideep Saikia, who has done a lot of work on the boundary issues, particularly in India's Northeast vis-a-vis China. And I'll start with you, Jaideep. It has been said that this 3-part boundary arrangement with China is an MOU that seems to be unfolding as a roadmap for a settlement of the China boundary issue with Bhutan. As we know, China has unsettled boundaries only with India and Bhutan. But the reality is that China has already occupied parts of Bhutanese territory and is also in the process of trying to occupy more. Is this something that you view with concern?
Well, it is a matter of concern that a friend and an ally of India, perhaps its biggest friend and an ally in South Asia, Bhutan, has gone into a 3-step roadmap or a memorandum of understanding with our adversary, China. But my reports tell me that PIMPU would have certainly consulted New Delhi before having gone into this 3-step roadmap, A. And B, China has been trying to, ever since Doklam really, move into certain strategic areas of Bhutan. We know about what happened during the Doklam crisis, and they are trying to expand the Chumbi Valley, as it were, and get closer to the Zampheri Ridge, which would give them access or at least an observation, kind of a point by which they could overlook our Siliguri corridor, a strategic Siliguri corridor, which connects the northeast with the rest of India. Having said that, they're also trying to reframe the tri-junction between India, Bhutan, and China in that sense. I'm referring to the places near eastern Sikkim, which is the Doklam area, and their movement during the Doklam crisis to that area would have actually give an idea that they are trying to get into Bhutan so as to be able to alienate India's only ally. The memorandum of understanding itself, I do not think is a matter of great concern, except the fact that it seems that there is a diplomatic move by Beijing as well, as far as Sikkim is concerned. But what is more concerning is the fact that model villages like the one in Pangda, which has, to my report, says that it's a village which has actually come up inside Bhutan, a Chinese village, a Tibetan village really, but Chinese nonetheless.
Yeah.
These are aspects which are matter of concern.
Okay, so that's, you've set the stage nicely actually, and you've actually led me on to my question. for PROBAL because his book really is around the India-China standoff at the Sikkim front. And you've also talked about Doklam, which was the big standoff, again, in that very area itself, very close to Nathula. So, Prabal, I want you to put it in context that it is said that after the 72, 73-day standoff over Doklam, the Chinese quietened down a bit, but not to be pushed back completely. Steadily after that, when we announced a sort of diplomatic victory, the Chinese were back to encroaching. They had done aggressive road building in that area. And reports also say that they started building accommodation for their troops in those areas, helipads in those areas, and with a little diversion from the point of confrontation, they more or less firmed up their territorial interests. And Chinese would argue that what they do within their own territory, that's their right. So is it really something that we need to revisit again in terms of Chinese buildup in that area on the Sikkim, Bhutan, India, China tri-junction?
Thank you very much for having me on the show. And I think the question, you've put it in the right context that, the movement started after the Doklam crisis. If you see, the interesting part here is that 4 years after the Doklam crisis, China has moved towards signing this three-step agreement. And also, China is trying, the worrying part here is that a matter of concern is that they have termed it as a package deal. Now, when I say a package deal, they have been trying to enlarge the area, the Doklam area where they can get access to the Jampheri Ridge. They have been trying to do that for a while. They understood in 2017 that a direct standoff will not help do that. So they had timed the engagement with Bhutan in recent times in line with the clash in Galwan in 2020. Around that time, they had started this dialogue. And if you notice that, they have also, for the first time, they've had talks, 24 rounds of talks since 1984, but it's the first time that they have actually laid a claim on the eastern side of Bhutan, the Sakteng forest sanctuary. They've had disputed areas with Bhutan, Doklam, Sinchulung, Dramana, but they have now focused on that part. They want to gain, have that traction towards Tawang. But coming back to your point, they are the Chinese, I would believe, are trying different other modes of gaining access. One of the ways they're trying to do so is they realize that taking India headlong wouldn't make much headway, and it'll be a standoff. So they would, and they're trying to therefore have a direct, engagement with Bhutan, use the term package, and that's where they're going back to that old discussion about the Pasamlong and the Jakarlong valleys, and that is the package deal that they talk with Bhutan. They've had a talk earlier in 2001 as well, where they exchange that with access to the western side, and therefore they can gain access to Doklam. Given that aim of Jampheri Ridge, their build up, and Chinese don't do things very, at an instant. They have a long-term plan. I would believe that all these things, the various movements of whether they're looking at the Sakteng sanctuary in the east, they're talking about a package deal, they're looking at creating more, the narrow valley that they have, they want to create a greater space for access to the Jampheri Ridge. All of this has to be seen in the context of their ultimate aim, which is to have, have the Siliguri corridor in their sights. You mentioned the book in 1966, which is the first time that Mao and Zhou Enlai had their eyes on Doklam, and that is when the Chinese soldiers had marched into Doklam plateau at that point of time. So the more I see of Xi, the more I see of Mao in terms of his plans, and nothing has changed. They see the Jampheri Ridge, they see Sikkim, they see the Jampheri Ridge as a means of outflanking Sikkim and cutting off India's northeast by cutting off the Siliguri corridor. So yes, that is definitely something that India must take note of, given that it's a quiet movement on several dimensions with that one aim of gaining access to the Jampheri Ridge, which they're constantly.
This also reminds me, that the old saying that is attributed to Chairman Mao, that he said that Tibet is the palm of my hand, and the 5 fingers are Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and Arunachal. And I don't think even President Xi Jinping has grown in stature beyond Mao to be able to challenge that very basic principle of faith, which is there amongst the Chinese leadership. But we'll come back after a break to look at 1 or 2 other issues which concern the boundary and China's encroachments on the Bhutan and how India should respond to whatever China is doing. With that, after a break. Welcome back. We are looking at Chinese encroachments in Bhutan and how this is going to be of increasingly strategic concern to India, because China doesn't have formal diplomatic relations with Bhutan, but China seems to be steadily arm twisting Bhutan into an arrangement which seems all too favorable for China. And Jaideep, I want to ask you that China is claiming around 89 square kilometers of area, which will help it have more territory in a narrow area jutting towards the Siliguri corridor. You referred to it earlier. PROBAL also talked about it. China is building an alternative access to the Chumbi Valley, again close to the Siliguri corridor. And what is also worrying is that there are reports of some 6 odd settlements that appear to be in territory disputed by China and Bhutan, including the contested track of roughly 110 square kilometers, 110 square kilometers. And all this is very clearly indicative that China is not going to stop to fulfill its agenda. Your view?
Well, as I've said, Maroof, the fact of the matter is they are trying to sort of, slicing into Bhutan so as to naturally get onto a vantage point from where they can overlook the Siliguri corridor. But in this age of technology, I think with satellites and other aspects, having a physical outpost, if I were to use a word, on Zamfara Ridge is one thing. I mean, that could be one of the motivations which actually led China to build a road, or build a road in the sense they're continuing to actually access that particular, into that direction. But more importantly, you must understand that recently that they have actually enacted something called the boundary law for itself, which actually has come into force on the 1st of January this year. Now, that's very interesting. I think observers of India-China relations, observers of India-China-Bhutan relations need to actually study it very carefully. And I've been doing a little bit of analysis as far as that is concerned. It's very interesting because one of the articles actually talk about the PLA and the People's Security Forces, that is the police, the Chinese police being handed over these powers over the borders, and it's almost as if the borders of the land borders of China are being extended as extended cantonment in case hostilities were to break out. But the fact of the matter is that they are wanting a contiguous border with India by way of even coming closer to the Indian boundary vis-a-vis Bhutan is quite clear. We have seen that in the past that they have destroyed bunkers of the Indian army which were in Doklam, and such other cases have happened. Doklam crisis, of course, the standoff went into our favor, but I would say that the stalemate really has not ended, and it is a possibility that they would sort of try to reach out to other places, as PROBAL also mentioned about the Sakteng Reserve Forest, etc., which is also very, very strategically located towards Arunachal Pradesh side. So if you look at the entire picture, I think they are trying to sort of reach out to Bhutan strategic locations in every which possible way. But I must also make one point here very clear that India must actually also understand that the changing dynamics of Bhutan after the restoration of democracy, that there has been a kind of a shift to democracy, and the people of Bhutan, perhaps, and I'm not making a value judgment here by saying that the majority of the population or otherwise are also understanding because of this age of internet and otherwise looking at the friend in the north, and there have been comments to that effect in open source media as well from Bhutan. I think we need to sort of recalibrate our neighborhood first policy as well when we look at our biggest friend and ally, Bhutan, because we seem to have, well, alienated quite a few of our neighborhood.
Yeah, I'll come back. I'll come to you about the neighborhood first, but let me ask PROBAL to explain to us the strategic importance of China's move towards the Jampheri Ridge and how China is obsessed with getting closer and closer to the Siliguri corridor, what it intends to achieve by doing that.
Right. So I'll just take a step back and also, talk about the fact that the entire area, which is Sikkim included in the past, in the mid 1960s, was in China's sights, and it has been played down because Sikkim thereafter became a part of India. But it was an associate state, and at that point of time, the entire region, which is the Jampheri Ridge, the Siliguri corridor, the Sikkim, the state of Sikkim at that point of time, were all a part of the Chinese plans, because they would occupy, if they were to occupy, they would cut out India at that point of time and link up with Pakistani troops in East Pakistan at that then. That was the plan at that point of time. So that has changed a bit, and they could have also sat, in Gangtok and dominated the entire plains thereafter. And the idea was to dominate the Indo-Gangetic plains to the extent that was possible. But that was then. You rightly mentioned that the more China has moved from Mao to Xi, the more the country has stayed close to Mao's thinking and has not been able to outgrow. Keeping that principle in mind, the intent of China, the strategic intent of China remains very similar. Sikkim, though, is out of their plans, but they do understand that Jampheri Ridge is important on two counts. One is that occupation of the Jampheri Ridge is going to outflank Sikkim. And number two, it's going to cut out the northeast part of India, given that the Siliguri corridor is just 22 kilometers wide at its broadest. So that is the strategic part. The other thing I feel that, the approach that China has adopted towards their aim of getting closer to the Jampheri Ridge is by, and I'll pick what you mentioned a short while ago, the changing modes and dynamics, and I think Jaideep mentioned as well, of the ecosystem in Bhutan, the new generation, etc. I would also touch upon the 2017 crisis in this regard. Given that at that point of time, and this is what I learned from my sources, is that when the Indian Army moved in, there was a bit of disenchantment as far as the royalty was concerned, because under the agreement, the royalty was to the Sikkim royals were to be informed whenever the Indian Army was to move in and face the PLA in a standoff. But in Doklam, apparently the response of the Bhutan royals came slightly later after the Indian Army had moved in there. And that was because before the standoff happened, there were apparently talks between the Bhutanese and the Chinese dignitaries, which hadn't quite succeeded at certain level. And this is something that I hear. So at that point of time, it was not very, the so-called thank you was a grudging thank you after a while. Also, what I learned is that the new generation believes that, and there has always been a belief in the Bhutanese circles, whether India would be able to defend any such transgression, incursion by China, which to a large extent was answered by the way India took on the 2017 Doklam crisis. Having said that, there is also an internal sort of dilemma inside Bhutan, which was not there earlier, and which is there at this point of time, that, whether they should be leaning completely towards India, or they should be taking an independent stance and seeing, how they can address the Chinese themselves. In India's context, the strategic threat remains. I think it's also important for India to take necessary steps to address the growing or the changing mindset as far as Bhutan is concerned, and the direct engagement between Bhutan and China, therefore, is a matter of, I wouldn't say it's a matter of worry, but it's a matter that India should be addressing sooner than later.
Well, everything, broadly speaking, has been covered by you two. I'm terribly short of time, but I think the parting shot I want to give is that, whether we call it a neighborhood policy, a neighborhood first policy, or look east or look west policies, all these policies require a lot of diplomatic energy. And there's a fact that I sometimes bring out, that I'm told that we have a smaller diplomatic corps than even that of Singapore, but we are trying to punch in the heavyweight category of world's geopolitics. So I think we need to enhance our capabilities, our staff, and our seriousness with which we need to engage our neighborhood. As Jaideep brought out, that otherwise steadily we are losing all the friends we have in the neighborhood. Bhutan is also being veered away by China. It's a matter of alarm, and we cannot take it lightly anymore. But thank you very much to both of you for your inputs. Until our next episode, goodbye.